everybody, I'm Rosemary and I've been missing. I've been AWOL, absent without leave, but I'm back. And I really want to thank the 2 people, probably out of the 4 of you who watch my videos, who've been in touch and said, where have the whiskey videos been? Well, it's been a case of Google wiped my YouTube account when I cancelled a Google email address. And I've lost my mother this year and we've got a new puppy. So the 2 of you have written have really spurred me into action. And of course a lot of people are looking around the Christmas, Hogmanay, Burns night time of year for ideas about whiskey. And so this is completely unplanned, completely unscripted. I'm just touched that somebody out there has missed me. I'm going to tell you what I have bought myself in the way of whiskey for this Christmas. Now, I really enjoy blends. I find them more complex, and although there's an awful lot of chewing and unpacking to be done in some big weighty single malts, I find more and more that my thoughts are straying to blends. So these are predominantly blends, they're not too expensive. It's only the single malt that's over £50. And I'm going to try and keep this short and quite to the point, and that's mainly because the Christmas ham is in the oven behind me, and everything may taste of ham because the smell in the kitchen's amazing. I'm going to kick off with a whiskey from Weems Malts. Now, they're not a big company and possibly some of you won't have come across them. I have struggled to really get overly excited about some of their expressions until I tasted this one, which is called Blooming Gorse. And up here in the Highlands, well, we live in Orkney, but if you're coming by road, especially in April or May, as you drive up the A9, there's just banks and banks of gorse in flower. And the yellow that brings to the countryside is so different from the fields of oilseed rape. But it's a wonderful, wonderful sight. So it's a romantic name. And this is a blend of 2 Highland malts. And I've always really enjoyed Highland whiskies. They're kind of slightly more outdoorsy and rugged without the kind of over-the-top peatiness of a lot of the island malts. And I realise that I've said kind of quite a lot, and I don't really want to have to stop and edit this video. I want to get it up there and out there so that you can enjoy it. But on the nose, this has got, well, I think it's got a slight tang of saltiness to it. It could be the ham, but it's fresh, and it does taste. It does have an aroma of the outdoors. Slightly sweet notes as well. Often you get this sort of heather honey note with a Highland whiskey. But lots and lots going on. And for me, with Weems, this is a really, I feel as though I found my place with Weems malts with this one. I've done a couple of Twitter tastings with them, and I must say that this for me is outstanding at the moment. So, right, initially quite thin on the palate, and then you get these huge honeyed, oh goodness, it's a real mouthwaterer, huge honeyed and kind of bourbon barrel apples and custard and vanilla, and it's just so yummy. Baked apples have so gone out of fashion. And yet when you bake a cooking apple in the oven and fill it up with sultanas and some honey, it's just a flavour that's enrobed by this, and then you put a vanilla custard on it. And I love food, as you can tell. That's really my life. So, second sip, all that settles down, but there's still, it's really clean, appley, custardy, gorgeous flavour with that, with vanilla in there as well. And it's just got stacks and stacks of flavour. Now, if you like tomato, you'll love this. I've no idea what the whiskies are in it, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there was some of that in it. I don't know. But it's lovely and warming at the back. I should have made a note about the ABVs with this, but I didn't before we started. Yeah, 46%. I suppose I'm not surprised because the amount of flavour in it is very big, and that's often achieved by adding, having that extra ABV. I may have put just a splidge too much water in there. That brings out sort of tart tatin, burnt caramel, apples, the addition of the water. But it's not an overly complex whiskey, but it's got enough character in it to make it a lip smacker. It's not heavy, it's not poundy, it's not going to really do you in any shape or form. Unless you drink the whole bottle, of course. But it has this lovely flavour in the mouth. And that is £45 a bottle. Now, my prices today are from the Good Spirits Company in Glasgow. They're a small independent retailer. They've just been recognised as a whisky icon for multiple retailers because they have a whisky shop and beer shop and wine shop, etc., etc. So their prices aren't going to be as cheap as some, but gosh, they know their stuff in there. And yeah, thumbs up to Weems for that. I have engaged with you 100%. So, thinking about what I want to buy for me for Christmas, I returned to Compass Box. And if you have watched my videos before, you'll know I'm a big Compass Box fan. And I suppose I've probably bought more bottles of this Oak Cross than any other whiskey. So a lot of the complexity of the flavour comes from the different oaks that are used and the different barrels that are used. But also Compass Box have been really brilliant at sort of putting new lids and bottoms, technical term, onto their barrels to introduce more flavour. And they've introduced some French oak into the equation in this way. Now, I sometimes think if I'm going on holiday, what shall I take with me that is going to, sort of satisfy my palate? And in fact, the YouTube whiskey video that I did with this, I did when we went glamping in Sussex near Gatwick Airport. I suppose to, make sure I had a good sleep each night. And I should always fondly think of it like that. Very different aroma from the Blooming Gorse. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a froggy throat, and those of you who are very eagle-eyed will see the lem sips behind the kettle. But I just thought you can put off making a video for all sorts of reasons and all sorts of lengths of time. Let's crack on with it. So, much drier and slightly more challenging on the nose than the Blooming Gorse. Lots more unpacking, but then you would expect that when you know that it's a whiskey that's been through a lot of different woods and that the woods have really been tweaked and twiddled to give you the complexity that is in this glass. So this is a blended malt whiskey, so there's no grain in there at all. And John Glaser, who started Compass Box, was originally with Diageo and has got an amazing palate, but also an amazing creativity in terms of kind of sussing out what would go with different whiskies. And something that intrigues me very much is that he's now got a couple of girls on his blending team really leading the way. And I think that's really interesting because Jancis Robinson, the great wine writer, said that a woman's palate is very different from a man's, not different necessarily better, but perhaps slightly more complex. And I think sometimes in whiskey we tend to go for the big flavours without the finesse and delicateness that attracts a lot of women drinkers. And let's face it, if you're going to share a whiskey with the one you love, chances are it might be a woman, or it might be a man and you're the woman who loves whiskey. Well, anyway, I'll skip over all that. Let me have a taste. Yes, it's such an intriguing nose. Right. Comparing it to the Blooming Gorse, much more spice. Really, in the Blooming Gorse, there seemed to be virtually no spice dancing on my palate. But here I've got ginger and black pepper and allspice, all those lovely flavours that I love. Again, it's mouth-watering. There seems to be a little bit of honey input in there, but there's also a suggestion of sultanas, and so that's the lighter of the dried grapes that we use in our cooking. It's not the big bang around Christmas cake, flavours of raisins, but there's a roundness to it which is much more complicated. And I think knowing the blending of this and the use of the woods, you would expect that. For some people, it might be, well, what's interesting, I was going to say it might be too much, but what's interesting is it starts off as very easy, and then you get this huge dance of spice at the background, in the back, which if you're camping is really nice and warming on a cooler evening. And then there's almost a kind of, for me today, a honeyed, carameled aftertaste, but with much more vine fruit in it. So kind of a lot going on in this glass. Similar but different. Does that make sense? So, a lightness but a depth of flavour. Top notes and bottom notes. A fascinating perfume. The initial, that's really interesting because when I taste whiskey I tend to get all sorts of different things on the first sip and then a more complete picture on the second sip. And some of my whiskey friends would say they just stop at the first sip. That's what gives them the flavour profile. I don't think that's the case because you go on to drink the whiskey. You and I do, viewer. We're not in the industry probably, and we are just doing this for enjoyment, and the enjoyment is the drinking of it. So, although that second sip I would expect to be much more complete and rounded in my mouth, in fact there is still this lovely spicy lingering. I'm just going to use my finger just to get a drop or two into the remainder in my glass. It kind of opens up the nose and balances the nose much more. And with the water, that stitches it all together. So instead of that nice easy up front and then the spicy finish, you've got this lovely altogether complex, warming but fruity flavour to it. And that is a whiskey that I go back to time and time again. I think it's actually on their literature that they say it's the Mr. Darcy of the whiskies in their range, although their range keeps growing absolutely incredibly. So, but in terms of their core range that's always there, it is a whiskey that keeps going, and the more you sip it and enjoy it, the more you're going to find in it, and is quite brooding in many ways. There's always something new to discover, and that's a pound more than the Blooming Gorse, £45, £46, both I think very affordable. And if you've been listening carefully, you will have heard that I said I bought these whiskies really for my Christmas treat. So it is a bit alarming that they've gone down quite that much. However, I would say that my friends Ed and Louise, who actually got these for me at the Good Spirits Company in Glasgow, they were down there several weeks ago. So it's just I couldn't wait for Christmas. So my next whiskey is the result again of a happy Twitter tasting, and it was a tasting that focused on Glenallachie. Now, I'm not editing. Whoa! It was a tasting that focused on Craigallachie, who is Glenallachie's brother, as you will know. But in this case, it is Craigallachie. And the master blender there is now Billy Walker, who is the guy who turned Glendronach and Benrick around, or Benrick around, and really made them iconic whiskies. So this is a McNair's Lumreek, long may your chimney reek. Oh, I'm not sure what the actual saying is, but it's all about some guys staying in a bothy on the estate, had a smoking chimney, and it just gave them, as they were sitting there that night with a bottle of whiskey, it just made them think of everything they wanted from a whiskey. So this is, they say it's a small batch, it's 46%. Did I tell you what this one was? 43. So back to the same strength as the Blooming Gorse. But what I was amazed by when I tasted this on the Twitter tasting was the complexity of it, because again, like the Compass Box, it goes through all sorts of different woods, but this time there's kind of Rioja wood involved as well. And it brings to it a really deep complexity, but at a really affordable price. And although it's about smoking chimneys and guys sitting around in a bothy, girls perhaps, who knows, it is, as I love the peatiness in my whiskies, it's as a seasoning and not as the dominant factor, not as something that blows your socks off when you nose it or actually taste it. I always remember with Weems I had a taste of their peat chimney in a tasting, and goodness me, I really couldn't deal with it. But I used the remainder of my sample to make up the cure for some bacon, and let me tell you, that bacon was fantastic. So back to the Lumreek, McNair's Lumreek. There are two versions of this, and I have the 12-year-old. The standard one with no age statement is slightly cheaper, but this is the one that really made a big impression when I tasted on Twitter. Complex nose, if you're looking for your reeky peaty smokiness, it's right there at the bottom underneath sort of golden syrupy treacly layers, but there's a fruitiness about this as well. And usually when we talk about fruitiness in whiskey, we're talking about apples and pears from bourbon casks, or you know, the dried fruits and sherry notes from the Spanish oak. But here, and given that we know there's been some wine casking here, the fruitiness of this whiskey is slightly more difficult to put an actual label on. So it's intriguing. And it's a bit like being in the sweetie shop. You know, there's lots and lots going on. So, lovely fruitiness. Absolute sweet shop notes. And it's only when you swallow that peatiness comes through. And it's almost like sitting in a room with an open fire and really loving the atmosphere. And it's only when you get up and put on the same jumper the next day that you realise that smokiness has been with you. And it's pretty much the same here. The smoke just comes through at the end. But there is this wonderful, slightly grapey flavour to it. It is so fruity. It's like a perfectly chopped fruit salad, which just blends all the flavours together. You know, if you have bits in a salad of any sort that are too big for everything else, it just doesn't work. You know, any salad should all be chopped up to the same size. A helpful tip for Boxing Day or any other day when you have salad. Here, it's as though there's no dominance between the different fruits that we can find in this whiskey. And it's just the most gorgeous blend, but there is this warmth coming through from the peatiness at the end. But, oh gosh, it's almost like a glorious fruit punch prepared outside over an open fire. And that might not be how you think of your whiskey. But it's got this, it's just so different. I don't really know how to articulate it to you because it is extremely fruity, but with this gorgeous vanilla-y, cinnamony smokiness to it, which, you know, I'm recording this to tell you what I'm having as my Christmas whiskies this year, and this is almost Christmas in a bottle. It's certainly a mild winter in a bottle for sure. Little touch of water. Water with a peaty whiskey either accentuates the peat or it knocks it right back. Here, immediately it accentuates it, and then it's sort of sweeter at the end. And quite honestly, it's a terrifically clever whiskey, and I wouldn't expect anything else from Billy Walker. And I would say that this is a fairly triumphant return for him. I need to learn more about Grey Galaxy, but this is certainly a whiskey that I would like to think will be on my whiskey offer here at home over and over again. Now, because I was a bit worried about my how long my whiskey Christmas supplies were going to last, I did have to do a little bit of extra shopping. So I had set out that I would do that one first, but in fact I ended up changed my mind because I'm a woman and therefore I'm able to. And I'm going to, oh, did I tell you how much this Lumric cost? I saw you winking at me. How much does it cost? £50 for the 12-year-old and worth every single penny. So back to my fourth blended whiskey, which is Scallywag. It's a non-age statement whiskey from Douglas Lang from their remarkable regional malt series. It's a blended Speyside whiskey. It's 46%, I think, again. Yes, indeed. And it is a whiskey that has scored time and time again. When I was living in Sussex and running a whiskey club down there, it so often came up #1 in comparative tastings. And although you probably are not going to have all these different whiskies at your house so you can taste them one after the other, having them here, I hope I can, as I sum up, you know, really tell you which of these whiskies I would buy time and time again. So I've bought a lot of Scallywag, but I've not had it before in a comparative tasting with other blends like this. It's quite often scored when it's been after a load of single malts, because, as I say, blended whiskies tend to bring an extra complexity. So, interesting, fruity clean. The more you sniff or inhale or whatever the proper whiskey term is, the more complexity you get. Still quite outdoorsy, but without the kind of the you know, openness of the blooming gorse. And there is a little bit of depth to it, and I know where that comes from, obviously, because, look, well, I suppose I might have left the cork out of the bottle and it's evaporated, but that's not the case. I have drunk it. So, more to it than meets the eye or meets the olfactory senses on the first go. Intriguing. That's how I would sum it up, actually. Now, on my tongue, this whiskey is wider than the other three that we've tasted before. It's got a very broad flavour spectrum, and yet as I analyse that, it's buttery, creamy, fruity, slightly honeyed. Not much in the way of dried fruits, which in many ways is quite surprising. Much more about tree fruits, apples and pears. Touch of honey in there as well. But then surprisingly, there is this smoke. Now, sometimes it seems much more predominant than it does to me this evening. But bear in mind that I've just been tasting the Limerick. So, this is a very big whiskey in the mouth, and it is quite all-enveloping and really rather nice. Second sip settles down quite a bit, lovely fruitiness, but then that smokiness, the peatiness comes through and is quite surprising and becomes the dominant thing. And I was initially really surprised by that in Speyside, because I am old enough and boring enough to not really associate peaty whiskies with Speyside. Now, of course, peaty whiskies are very, very trendy at the moment, and a lot of distilleries that have hitherto not touched a charred barrel or a barrel that has had peaty whiskey in it have now done so and put their delicious Speysides into those barrels. I still don't think of Speyside like that. I know I've got to get out more, I've got to be more experimental and go down that route. But I do find that warmth that's in the back of this very delicious and somewhat surprising. But bear in mind that this has been an absolute #1 in various tastings in my dark and murky past. Tiddly tad of water. Do you remember tiddly tads, dear viewers? Yes, that smooths it out completely. Now, I'm going to just have a proper slurp of water, and then I'm going to taste these two one after the other. So the Limerick, bearing in mind they've both had a little drop of water added. And then the Scallywag. This is more elegant. This is slightly rough around the edges if you taste it after that, but they're both delicious whiskies. So that's quite an interesting conundrum, isn't it? If you were going out with 50-ish pounds in your pocket, which of these would you buy? Well, that's probably depend on which they had in the shop or which was available on the internet. The Scallywag is 42, this one's 50. Maybe that price tag suggests the, you know, the sophistication of the whiskey. This one has an age statement on it, that one doesn't. Both delicious. That one has a lovely little doggy on the label. So, as I said, these were meant to be my Christmas whiskies. It's actually the 23rd of December today, so there is still a little bit of all of them in the bottle. But I was shopping in the Toon in Kirkwall, the county town of Orkney, the other day, and I did think that perhaps I should just top up a little bit. And so it's quite interesting. Obviously Orkney with Highland Park and Scapa is a whisky place. And consequently, a lot of the shops are well stocked with single malts, but there isn't much in the way of blended whiskies about. And so I decided to go for a Springbank from Campbelltown, which is, let's face it, the newest whisky region in Scotland. I'm just going to have another sip of water. Although in Victorian times there was more whisky there than you could shake a leg at. And Springbank is pretty iconic. I mean, it's an amazing brand. They do what they do, they produce what they can, and that is governed by the size of the distillery and the equipment in it, and they ain't going to get any bigger. And so when what they produce is gone, it's gone. I hope that tickle in my throat is gone. So I've gone for a 15-year-old, and this is the only single malt in this collection. It's £62 at the moment at the Good Spirits Company. So it's at least £10 more expensive, well, £12 more expensive than anything else. The Lumry, their 12-year-old. And I mean, I've always loved Springbank. And I'll tell you why that is. Many years ago, I wrote a history of Fortnum and Mason, intertwinkled with the social history of tea drinking in the UK. And there was a wonderful, wonderful lady called Annette, who was head of the wine department at Fortnum's, and she introduced me to Springbank, and it was joyous. I loved it. So, lovely, slightly salty, slightly maritime nose on this whisky. Rich. Not much in the way of fruit on there. So, certainly none of the sort of the appley, peary tree fruits that we were having around here. But, you know, kind of a whisky that's been around the block a few times and knows it's up there in the elite. Terrific depth of flavour. Lovely. I mean, you could just sniff this all evening if that's what you want to do. But that's not my idea of a good day. And so I'm tasting. Whoa, big round flavour. Do you know, that whisky has kind of sunk through my taste sensations in my mouth. And it has left a deep richness with a sort of salty tang. Fruitiness, not overly sweet, but there's raisins coming through, and those flavours are developing in my mouth as I chat to you. If you're still there, are you? Oh, yeah, I think I can see you. Just really satisfying. I've been a little bit bored with single malt whiskies, and that might seem like absolute, well, a terrible thing to say. But kind of sometimes you have to go back and revisit something like Springbank or Glenfarclas and just recenter your taste buds. I can remember giving whisky women a 10-year-old Springbank and them all thinking it was a little bit like an adolescent The 15-year-old really for many people is where things start to come together. And that is elegant, it's sophisticated, it's edgy, it's used to being outside, it's deep. It's not challenging in any shape or form. It is just a really easy whiskey to drink. And it is delicious. And it is whiskies like that that really bring together what makes a small business. It's well, really, they kind of hang their integrity because they can't get any bigger unless they put in a load of new equipment or, you know, change the way in which they do things. And as far as I know, they're not planning to do that. And so they are governed, as a cheesemaker who makes by hand is governed by the size of his vat. You know, if he can only get 90 gallons of milk in his tank, he's only going to be able to make, you know, a few kilos of cheese. And it is with this, and that's why their whiskies have such integrity. Yeah. It's even smoother with a drop of water, but for my taste, I wouldn't add it. And £62, you know, that's awfully good value for money. It really depends on what you've got in your pockets and what you're prepared to spend. It'd be interesting now for me to go from that Springbank 15-year-old, which I have to say is one of my all-time favourites, to go back to the Limerick 12-year-old, which is blended. And you know what? For 9 occasions out of 10, that is just as satisfying. If I had had a wonderful dinner and just wanted a whiskey at the end of it, then yes, that would be fantastic. Monday to Friday, I would go with that. But the main thing to say to you is, this is a new favourite, this is a new friend that I've only just met, as indeed is the Limerick. But all of these whiskies here, I would buy over and over again. And just to run through the prices again, because I've never remembered them, so I've written them down. 45, 46, 50, 62 and 42. None of them are going to break the bank if you're used to buying single malt whiskies. And I think all of them are going to delight you. And so I am resolved to try and talk to you more often. And thank you very much to those of you who have said, where are you? What's happened? If you're new to watching me, you'll just have to believe that people over the last 5 years or so have been watching my whiskey reviews and enjoying them. And I hope that we shall meet again very, very soon. And so, all that remains for me to do is to say, which whiskey shall I see you out with? Well, I think I'll start with the Blooming Gorse. And thank you, Weems, for introducing this. I'm a fan. Yum, yum, yum.